I remember when I got kicked out of preschool and was happy because I got to spend the day with her instead. I remember cooking Italian feasts with her in the kitchen in her basement. I remember when she taught me to pump my legs on the swings so I could go higher and higher in hopes of touching the sky. But she didn't remember these things.
My mom was born in 1924. She was a very smart, very athletic young girl. Grew up in Rome, Italy.
This is my dad.
She was a good person all the way around. Always was very helpful to others, even if she couldn't help them monetarily. You know, she would do her best to help them out with what she could. And that's just the kind of person she was. She fell deeply in love at a young age with my father. Got married. They were in Italy. They had 2 children while they were in Italy. My sister Elsa and my brother Paul. She was very, very talented when it came to making dresses and anything that had to do with sewing. Eventually she was doing dresses for an old show in the United States called the Jackie Gleason Show, and she would be the one who made the dresses for all the female stars that came on the stage. She kept me pretty well clothed in all handmade sweaters and outfits and things. I think through much of my younger end of my childhood, I was pretty much in clothing that she made for me. The happiest I remember her, at least over my lifetime, outside of when I graduated from law school, I've never seen a more proud parent out there, but is when I had children. And it gave her a second lease on life. That was before the Alzheimer's hit, or at least was detected.
Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States.
My mom made the most spectacular spaghetti sauce, I guess you'd call it. And one night she decided that she would make dinner at her home, and she brought out the sauce, which smelled delicious as always. When I tasted it, it was almost, you know, a gagging kind of thing, because it wasn't Mom's usual sauce. And what we figured happened was she took the container that had sugar in it as opposed to the salt for the pasta. So she had pasta with sugar in it, but it just absolutely destroyed the sauce, and it was painful. It was painful because that was something that was second nature to her. She knew how to make that sauce. She could probably do it in her sleep, but you know, she made that mistake, and it was, you know, that was another one of those things that sort of triggered, well, there's something wrong here. We're figuring the Alzheimer's probably for a good 12 years that we were aware of, and probably even a little bit longer that we weren't, because we weren't recognizing it as for what it was. You have those moments where somebody forgets something, repeats themselves, but a lot of that you just sort of attribute to old age. You just say, well, okay, she forgot, and move on. But at a certain point, you know, you'd set up an appointment and she wouldn't be ready. You know, she would require a lot more prompts, you know, in order to do things.
Almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's disease are women.
What they do is they rule out the other possible causes for the dementia or the forgetfulness or the odd behavior, and they came down with the likely diagnosis would be Alzheimer's.
Every 67 seconds, someone in the United States develops the disease.
It was very difficult for the family, because she was a pretty integral part of our existence, especially while my wife and I were raising our kids. You know, moments came down to it where you sit there and you have to change your parent, you know, because they messed up, something happened, you know, things had to be done that you're not used to doing, and you know, those are all things that are sort of They're somewhat difficult to do, but you do it because you love somebody and you care about them.
In Illinois alone, caregivers provided 671 million hours of unpaid care in 2014.
I don't know that she ever completely forgot who I was. And I know that that's a very difficult thing. I think it's probably the fear of walking in and her not recognizing me was probably the hardest thing.
Even though certain memories of hers were lost, others were not as easily forgotten.
Our trips from and to the residence where she was staying was an Alzheimer's specific care residence, and it was about 20 minutes from my house. I would usually have someone with me from the family to go pick her up or drop her off later that night. And so we would sing Dean Martin's That's Amore and several other, famous Italian songs, Volare, those kind of things she really, really enjoyed. And she got a kick out of singing. You could tell that she was following, that she still knew the words. And it was a routine. I mean, that would always be playing. If it was a record, it would have been worn out, going back and forth, because we did it hundreds and hundreds of times. So we would gauge, how her day was going and where she was at in her Alzheimer's by how actively she participated in it. But it was amazing, even towards, the tail end, how much she actually remembered of those songs. You could see her mouth the words sometimes, even when she wasn't really talking anymore. So it reached a part of her that, that maybe wasn't always accessible, just in terms of general conversation.
But how would it feel not to remember where you are, or not to recognize what's going on, or where you're headed?
Some of the worst trips happened to be the ones where she was afraid to go back. Not so much because she was afraid of where she was going to be, but she didn't know who was going to be there. Where are you taking me? How long am I going to be there? Who's there? Will I know anybody? And all of these things were well taken care of by the staff, but you couldn't get that across to her. You tried to allay her fears as much as you possibly could, and to see a person in their 80s scared to that extent was extremely, extremely painful. She was always very receptive to touch, to music, hugs. She always, that's the way she always was, that's the way she always gave to other people. And even though she couldn't speak to me necessarily, but she communicated, whether it was by a squeeze of a hand, whether it was raising her eyebrows, knowingly after I said something. But that was a very sorely missed communication, if you want to call it that. For me it was. One of the nice things, and sort of one of the things that I truly enjoyed, is much the way I used to enjoy tucking my kids in at night when they were small. We would do the same thing with my mom. She was very passive, and she enjoyed that. I don't know if it was the routine as much as she just enjoyed being tucked in, but I would often, as I used to do with my kids, tuck in the sheets around really tight on her and give her a big hug, and she really enjoyed that, sort of be cocooned there. I think that made her calm and made her feel comfortable. And I guess for as much as anything, it made us feel good too.
When I asked my dad whether he worried about developing the disease, he told me,
it takes some working at in order to acclimate yourself to someone who has Alzheimer's. I can't even imagine, not being able to think the way I currently do. So it's something that's there, that you worry about. I don't think you can, live your life in fear of it. I'm not sure if there was a test for it, if I'd actually want to do it.
I then asked him what he would want others to know about the disease, and I think his answer speaks well for the both of us.
the person that you loved and cared about is still there. That no matter if they can't communicate with you, it's not because they don't want to. It's not because they're angry. It's not because they're being rude. They can't. Sometimes they'll do actions that may seem like they're in anger, but it's actually just to get something out. And you may read it as anger. You might read it as they're squeezing your hand too hard, or they're banging on something. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They're just trying to communicate, and they're sort of behind this locked wall that they can't get through. So I think, to me, the thing is to remember that person is still there, to talk to them like they're still there, to treat them like they're still there. One of the things that the gals at Sunrise always used to say was she was always so polite, and she was always willing to help, and that's who she was. And it was neat to see that she, despite the Alzheimer's, that part of her brain, as to who she was still true all the way through.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. When the world seems to shine like you've had too much wine, that's amore.